everyone, in today's video we're going to be going over a pretty simple modification, pretty inexpensive but very worthwhile. I have gotten the parts through Monsoon. Again, I'm not endorsing them, I did pay for them, they have nothing to do with the video. But today we're going to be replacing the stock spark plugs with the Denso Iridium Power series. This is a 14mm tapered spark plug, which with the iridium and the stock being platinum should give us a little bit more power. Also, the ITV22 is one step colder than the stock, so on my next modification, which if you haven't already collected is going to be tuning the vehicle, should be able to give me a little bit more control over the cylinder and the ignition with the boost levels being up. Okay, so for pretty much every engine bay modification that we're going to do here on the Focus RS, the first thing we're going to have to do is remove this engine cover here, which consists of 4 rubber grommets that are on studs. Get a snap here, snap here, snap in the back, and then one up front. Once we get that removed, we're going to go ahead and just set this off to the side so we can get access to the spark plugs. As you can see, like most modern day cars, the Focus RS uses a coil on plug system. So each plug has its own source of electricity, making sure that we're going to get an even distribution of electricity to each one of the plugs, thus increasing the performance. One thing I did notice on these is that stock or aftermarket air intake, you are going to have to pull this centerpiece off, because to get the very first coil and plug here to come up, you're going to have to get to a bolt that's underneath it. So I'm going to go ahead and take that off. Once that's off, then we can go ahead and get started on replacing the plugs. Alright, now that we've gotten that air intake pipe out of the way, I'm going to go ahead and use a trim tool to go ahead and take this little piece of wire that's routed through one of the fasteners for the coil on plug here. I'm going to remove that, loosen it up, give us a little bit of space here. So now we can get to the nut on the coil on plug right here. There's also another wire that's fastened with on the 4th all the way to the left here. We're going to go ahead and use the trim tool and pick that one up off the threading too. Get that out of the way. After all of those have been gotten moved, we're going to go ahead and pull the electrical connections from the plugs here. But before we do that, anytime you work electrical on a vehicle, you're going to want to go ahead and disconnect the negative on the battery. So we're going to do that first, now that we're set up to actually disconnect these and pull them out. So after our setting up our coils ready to be removed, we're going to pop the battery box off. Let's just pull on each side, spread it apart, and pull it up and out. That's going to come off and it's going to reveal the battery to you. After we've taken the battery cover off, we're going to go ahead and disconnect the battery right here at the positive side. The car only having 3,000 miles on it, relatively clean battery, easy to disconnect. We're just going to pull that out of the way so it's not going to come in contact with any metal parts or the battery itself when we're doing this. Now that we have the battery disconnected, we're going to go ahead and take the wire off of the coil here, which requires us taking this white tab, sliding it backwards all the way, and then what you're going to want to do is put pressure on the back of the white tab downward, which will lift and allow you to slide it right off. We're going to do that to all 4. After disconnecting each coil wire from the coil, we're going to go ahead and use an 8mm, start loosening the coils up so we can pull them out. Now on the second coil from the right hand side, you don't want to use an 8mm wrench because the intake gets in the way of any kind of ratcheting system you have. You may be able to fit a little 1/4-inch stubby 8mm in there, but I'm just going to go ahead and use the wrench because once you get it loosened up enough, you basically just take it off with your hands. And then once you get that off, you're going to want to make sure that you keep all of these 2 bolts and 2 studs with nuts that come out of these. in a nice safe place where you're not going to lose them. And I usually prefer to keep all of mine, set them right up here on the cowl of the car all together so I know which ones are which. The two studs with the nuts are going to be the two end pieces, and the two actual bolt ones are going to be the two centers. Now, although all the coils themselves are the same, we're going to go ahead and approach this doing it one at a time. So first I'm going to start by taking the coil out. What you want to do is give it a little side-to-side motion as you're giving a little bit of upward pressure, and you'll hear a pop once you hear it out. A vacuum pop. Pull it out. That'll expose your coil, the rubber boot, and then in there's top of your spark plug connect. Now, before moving the coils and after removing the coils, I do recommend going ahead with a shot of air and going through here to get any debris that's going to be lying in between your spark plug valley here. The last thing you want to do with the tolerances being so tight on modern day engines, especially engines on performance cars, is have anything drop into their cylinder, because you're going to have complete exposure to the cylinder head when you go in here. So I'm going to go ahead and remove that. I've already blown out every one of them. You're going to take your standard 5/8 spark plug socket here, which has a rubber fitting on the inside to secure it to the spark plug so when you pull it up it doesn't fall in. There's other methods of doing it. Some people use magnets, but I prefer the rubber method as it just sticks in there and you can pull it right out. We're going to go ahead and make sure that our wrench is on loosen. Stick it into the valley, which is quite far down. Make sure we're around the spark plug here. And loosely loosen your spark plug. You do not want to jerk it, because the last thing you want to do is break the porcelain or break any of the threading to fall into the cylinder itself. And as you can see, once completely loosened, you'll start getting a little bit of side-to-side movement. That's when you can go ahead and slowly pull your spark plug out, which should retain right into the socket there. And as you can see, I've been running a little bit lean here, it looks like, on this factory plugs. Now that we've got our old spark plugs out, we're going to go ahead and get the new ones here. Which you can see right here are pre-gapped to 0.026, 26 thousandths of an inch. That's pre-gapped by Montoon. We pull these out, open them up. They come in individual packaging for each one. Pull that out. See that they got a nice protective sleeve over it to protect the gap, which is really nice. But one thing that a lot of people don't tell you, when you get pre-gap spark plugs, there's 99% chance that the gap is correct on them. But never install spark plugs in your vehicle without checking the gap first. So now on the Focus RS, we know that the gap on the spark plug is supposed to be set to 0.026 or 0.66 millimeters. So we're going to go ahead and pull this off, and we're going to use a gap checker. Now I'm going to use a blade specific gap checker. And if you can read that, where it says 0.66 or 0.66 millimeters or 0.026, really hard to read on the metal. This is an individual gap right here. So this is an individual blade to check the gap. We're going to take this, take the spark plug, put it through, and see how the gap comes out. That's perfectly gapped. There's no movement whatsoever in there. As you can see, slide it in. There's no up and downward movement whatsoever. It's got a little bit of drag on it, which is perfect. Spark plug gap circles where it gaps all the way around. Don't ever pick up one of those. Those are inaccurate and they end up ruining more spark plugs than they gap. The only way to truly gap the spark plug and know exactly where you're at is using a multi-blade tool, where you can pick the specific measurement and gap it off of a single blade. But as far as the circular keychain freebie giveaways, definitely if they give it away to you, give it right back to them or throw it in the trash, because that's going to be the most inaccurate tool you're going to use. It's going to cause more damage than it's worth. Now when installing spark plugs, it's always been customary to have 3 instruments here. 2 of them being materials, one of them being a slide blade. And like I said, you have to use the blade. Don't use the round gappers that you see at AutoZone or any of the other companies. I'm not saying anything against AutoZone, I'm just saying that those tools do not work. Another one is dielectric grease. We'll go into dielectric grease when I'm showing you how to install it onto the boot and also onto the plug. The other one that most people have been using forever and still do use is aluminum anti-seize lubricant that gets applied to the threading of the spark plug. Now, I can say by doing research that major spark plug companies such as NGK and other companies have said that applying any type of lubricant or anti-seize material to the threading of the plug does affect its performance. They said it's more important to have the correct torque of the plug down and not to put anything on the threading, because the electricity travels from the diode down the base to here. So not only are you putting something in here that's going to potentially obstruct the flow of the electricity, but you're also putting something in the threads that could possibly future fall into the cylinder head itself, and that is not needed. With modern metals and the changes that the spark plug companies have made, anti-seize for aluminum here is just something that you just don't need anymore. So we're just going to go ahead and put it in bare. There's no reason to put anti-seize on it, and every reason that there is to put anti-seize on it. Now you may be wondering why you're seeing Q-tips out here. And that's because of another myth that's been going around, and a lot of people do it and still do it with their spark plugs, is they think that dielectric grease is some kind of conductive unit, where they can just fill their boot with it and set it over their spark plug, flop it all over their spark plug. When in fact, dielectric grease is a non-conduit material. It's actually made to be applied to the ceramic portion only of the spark plug, not to touch any of the metal, and to the rubber portion only of inside of the boot, not to touch any metal in the boot. And the only reason that it's used is because there is current going through the spark plug into the rubber boot, and it's used to preserve the quality and the integrity of the rubber boot, and it's also used to make it so it's a little bit easier to get off when you have to go and change the spark plugs again, if you ever do have to change them again. You always pull boots out, and see in older cars where they're brown and they're all nasty, and that's because of the case that the dielectric grease was not applied to the boot correctly. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a Q-tip. We're going to apply the dielectric grease to the Q-tip in a very, very small amount. I mean, barely just get any on there like that. So we have this small amount. We're going to go in the boot, and we're basically just going to do a circular motion in the boot here, making sure that all the rubber gets contacted, but we do not want to take it all the way down to the metal. If it touches the metal, then it will interfere with the electric connection to the metal. So just work it around in there, make sure the nice thin layer. Don't need to cake it on. If you cake it on, it's just going to cause more problems. And then if you want, you can go ahead and kind of get the outside of the boot here too with it. You can see it working. And then we're going to go ahead and just use the same Q-tip and spread it up on the ceramic portion of the spark plug. And that's basically all you need dielectric grease for. There's no need to use it any further, and there's no need to use any more than what I just used. Now when reinstalling the new spark plug, I kept the cover on here just to eliminate any debris from getting into the threads. We don't want any debris getting into our cylinder head. Go ahead and stick it into our spark plug socket here. It's solid, won't fall out. And then we're just going to slowly take it down and drop it into the threading of the head, trying not to get any materials whatsoever in there. We're going to slowly start the thread. You'll feel it catch. Once you feel it catch, just go ahead and keep turning until you tighten it by hand here. And this is going to go along with why we do not need to use any sort of lubricant on the threads or any kind of anti-seize. This is going to go to show that if we set it at the proper torque and everything is clean, that we will not have an issue with pulling this back out in 50 to 100,000 miles to replace it. Now this is where things can get confusing. With this particular spark plug with the 14mm thread pitch, Denso requires a 20 to 30 Newton meter torque, which comes out to 15 foot-pound to 25 foot-pound, or a half of, once hand tightened, a half a turn or 2/3 of a turn. I'm going to go ahead and take my wrench here, and I already currently have it set to 20 Newton meters, which is on the low hand of the 20 to 30. I'm going to start there and see what it feels like, and see if we need to go any further with it. So we're just going to slowly torque it. There's 20 Newton meters. I think I am going to go to 25 Newton meters on the torque of this, because 20 Newton meters was just about hand tight. So we're going to go to 25 Newton meters. 25 Newton meters is going to put you at about around 18 to 20 foot-pounds of torque. Ford does suggest 25 foot-pounds of torque. I believe that to be a little high. I mean, that's a quarter of the torque of what your wheels are held on with. So I'm going to take this to about 18 foot-pounds or 25 Newton meters of torque and secure it. So now that we've secured this at 25 Newton meters, we go ahead and take the coil plug here. We're going to slip it right gently back over the spark plug, making sure that the spark plug goes inside of the rubber. We're going to push it down, and we should hear some kind of audible snap or click once it gets set. Just right there. Cannot go down any further. It's set right on. Go ahead and take my connector, plug it right back in here. Once we plug that right back in, just push the white tab forward. And we're secure. Alright guys, now that we got the new plugs in, let's go start her up, see how she sounds. So just as a side note guys, I've had this vehicle for 3,000 miles and I did tear it around 1,000 miles. I started messing around in the engine bay, taking things apart and look at things, and one thing I did do was pull the spark plugs. And the whole reason I did this very in-depth video about changing spark plugs and added so much detail to it was because the factory gap is supposed to be 26 thousandths of an inch. And every single one of these Ford OEM spark plugs that I pulled out of this car were at least 30 thousandths of an inch or larger. As you can see, fits no problem. Slides right in. And this is bigger than 30 thousandths of an inch. So we're talking almost 5 thousandths of an inch difference. That's huge when it comes to spark. Huge when it comes to the combustion chamber. And especially huge when it comes to tuning. So that's why I did this video. That's why I've changed it. I hope you guys liked it. I enjoyed making it. Remember to hit that subscribe button, like, and we've got plenty more to come. This is going to be a big build. Have a good day, guys.